there. I was just dreaming about ways I can make this guest room a little bit more fun and interesting. I think this bed needs a headboard and a footboard. We're going to build that today using basic construction lumber, a cool product that my wife found on overstock.com, and using very basic techniques and tools. So, let the dreams begin. The first thing I want to do is make some posts for the headboard and the footboard. I couldn't find any posts that would really work that weren't pressure treated in the size I needed. So for this application, I'm just going to take some of this 2x6 framing pine and glue a couple of pieces together to get the thickness that I want for the post. My camera died while I was doing this, but I took my 2x6 framing members, smothered a bunch of Titebond 2 glue on each side of them, sandwiched them together, and used a few clamps I have in my shop to help laminate it and hold it together while it dries. In all honesty, this madness is looking pretty crazy. I'm not even sure it's going to work, but we're going to find out. I also showed up with the smallest bottle of wood glue I could find to put this together. I really need a whole gallon. All right, I got my beam glued up here. It's 2x6s. They are framing lumbers. They're actually not a full 8 feet long. They're 93 inches. I want my headboard to be roughly 5 feet tall and my footboard to be roughly 24 inches tall. So because of that, I want to just cut these down to rough length so I have some extra to work with, and just to make this a little bit easier to work with as I send it through the table saw and the planer. I'll make a mark at 62 inches. It'll give me a couple of inches to work with when I put my headboard together and get it final dimensions. And I'll just take this to my miter saw, chop it right there. This cut doesn't have to be perfect. The next thing I want to do is run these through the table saw to get a nice straight edge on one side. I've got a crack here where the corners of the framing lumber are rounded off, and I want to smooth this down and make it flat so this seam doesn't show up as bad. My first cut, I'm going to make it 5 3/8 inch wide. Here you can see that leaves a much cleaner edge, and that's something I can work with. I can already tell that I should have planed these boards down before I glued them together, because I will have a little bit of a crack here that I may need to fill with wood filler before I finish it. I'll continue to rip down the other 3 pieces, one for the headboard and the 2 for the footboard, down the same way. Now that I've got one smooth edge to work with, I'll adjust my saw to 5 inches. That'll give me the final width that I want to work with. I'll put my fresh cut edge along the fence, and I'll run it through to make sure I have a nice parallel stretch on both sides. The next thing I want to do is run these through the planer to get an even thickness on all of my boards, so I have something that's fairly dimensional to work with. I don't have a joiner. I'm going for a more rustic look, so I know this isn't probably going to be perfect, but honestly, these boards are pretty straight, and I think I'll be able to get a pretty nice edge on both sides. Let's do it. That's going to turn out pretty good. I'll just keep running my boards through, lowering it about a 1/16 to a 32nd of an inch at a time until I have both sides nice and smooth. Okay, I got these boards laying down to about 2 3/4 inch thick. Thickness is not hugely important. I just wanted to make sure that I had a fairly nice smooth surface on each side that I can now sand. I am going for a little bit more of a rustic look on this project, so getting them perfectly flat was not the objective. If I wanted to get them perfectly flat, I'd probably run them through another time or 2 on each side. Now that I have these boards as square as I can get them, and they're the right thickness and dimensions, I'm going to cut them down to size. These headboard pieces are going to be about 5 feet long. Footboard pieces I'm going to cut down to about 28 inches. Next, I'm going to do some light sanding just to take the corners and edges off this, make it a little bit smooth before we start the frame that'll hold the aged barnwood lumber that my wife found online. When I sand, I like to use this Abernethy brand sandpaper. In my experience, this sandpaper doesn't clog as much as traditional sandpaper, and it doesn't seem to leave as many swirl marks. And just like that, we have our 4 corner posts for our bed. The next thing we'll need to do is create a frame. There's a few things to consider when making your own mattress frame. First of all, what is the size of your bed? Second of all, do you need to support a box frame, or do you want to build a structure to support your mattress directly? In my case, we pre-purchased this king-size bed frame that eliminates the need for a box spring bed. Since I already have the structure of the bed held in place, I'll just need to build my frame and make sure that it fits around it. So the next thing we're going to do is take some 2x4s and create a frame that will be supported on each side by the headboard and footboard. Now inside of this frame, we're going to use a different product. This is a faux barnwood. It's about 1/4 inch thick. It does have some adhesive on the back, and it's an MDF product. We want this to look like staggered barnwood in that frame. I think I'm going to have to be creative on how I attach this because I'm not confident that the sticky backing is going to hold it there for the long term. So I think I'm going to build a frame, inlay some 3/4 inch plywood into the frame, and then attach this with the sticky backing and some brad nails. The next thing I need to do is math. I'm trying to figure out how wide I need to make this frame in order to fit my metal frame inside of it when I'm done and have a good inside dimension. To do this, I'm going to take the width of my 2 posts, which is 9 3/4 inches. I'm going to subtract 3 inches for that to account for my side rails that will connect my headboard and my footboard together. That leaves me with 6 3/4 inches. If I deduct that from my total 78 inches that I want my frame to be across, I get a measurement of 71 1/4 inches. I might add 1/4 inch to that just to give me a little bit of wiggle room when I'm trying to fit this metal frame into the bed. So I think I'll go with 71 1/2. 71 1/2 inches will be the width that I'll need to make the frame that will hold our barn wood. Next, I'm going to take my palm router equipped with a 1/8 inch round over bit and just go over the edges of all the main posts for the headboard and footboard. This little palm router made by Makita is really my go-to for this. I don't think I've ever used this router for anything but a 1/8 inch round over bit. It just helps give the piece a nice finished look around all the edges. To make the frame that will hold our barn wood, I'm going to use some more kiln-dried framing material. I'll mill this down much like I did with our beams. I'll put a straight edge on each side with a table saw. I'll plane it down to a dimension that I like, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I will put the plywood in the back that will be the support for the fake barnwood. In a perfect world, I'd be able to put a dado right in this board that would receive my plywood panel and my faux barnwood piece. But because those two are going to be too thick, I'm just going to cut a groove in the back about a 1/2 inch deep all the way around so that it will receive my plywood panel and the extra thickness for my faux barnwood. I'll do this on the table saw. Here you can see I'm setting the blade height just proud of my plywood and barnwood thickness. I've set my fence to cut exactly 1/2 inch into the board that will create the first cut for our groove. Next, I'll adjust my blade height and the fence to cut this little piece right here and take this out, leaving a nice notch for our panel to rest in. Now you can see we have a groove that will hold our plywood panel. The next thing I want to do is attach a stretcher on the headboard just to give it a little bit more support. I'm really not particularly concerned with how high I make this, just that it's perfectly level. So what I've done is I've clamped some scrap pieces of wood to the bottom of each post that are exactly the same height. I'll use that as a reference to make sure that this board is the same height all the way across. And I'm going to try to use a Dowling Jig, put some dowels in here. I don't have one of those fancy Festool machines that other people have, so we'll see how the dowels work out. So for full transparency, this is the Dowling Jig I went with. It's this one right here. It's a plastic model. I went cheapo on this, only about $15. Honestly, I'm not going to leave a link because, you know, for this application, it didn't work very well. I think for a smaller project, it's probably got its place, but for this, it just didn't work well. I was able to get about 1 dowel in each side, so I'm going to have to switch my plans up and probably put some pocket screws or something behind to brace this in place after I glue it. So got the 1 dowel on each side. That's all I'm comfortable with. Good idea, just not something that's going to work here. All right, well, that didn't turn out at all like I thought. I wish I would have got that on camera. Basically, the Dowling Jig didn't work at all. The dowels were really loose. This whole thing was sliding around all over the place, going nuts. I had to end up thinking fast since I put glue all over everything, and I don't have a bunch of clamps that can hold things together. I just ended up doing some pilot holes with a couple of 3.5 inch wood screws that will hold this thing together. Again, it's just a little extra support at the base. You're not going to see it. I might cover those with some wood filler later before I sand it. And I think that's just a lesson that things don't always go right. That's what I get for trying to use a new tool without testing it on a large scale project that it probably really wasn't designed. So when you're going to do these things, try them out first. Don't do what I did. Learn from my mistakes. The next thing I want to do is figure out where this frame piece needs to be mounted on my headboard post. To do that, I'll simply leave a 3/4 inch gap at the top. I'll measure up from the rail that I just put in place, 14 3/8 inches. I'll cut a scrap piece of wood that length to put between this rail and the bottom piece of this frame. That way that both sides will line up perfectly. So here you can see I've got my scrap piece of wood, 14 3/8 inch. I clamped it to my headboard post. Next, I took my headboard frame and clamped it to the post, and to make sure that it references flat with a 3/4 inch reveal, just using a scrap piece of lumber to make sure that it stays nice and even all the way down. Now that I've got this where I want it, I'll drill some pilot holes right behind where this frame will go. I'll put a little glue on this edge and I'll screw it in place to this headboard post. The next thing I need to do is address this gap. As you can see, when you cut all the way through, it would leave a gap on the end that'll show through. So to fix this, I'm just going to mark off and I'm going to cut this tongue off of this bottom rail. All right. Got my side pieces on to the frame that will hold our barnwood looking plywood panel. Next I need to attach the top piece of this frame. And since you won't see the back of this, I'm just going to go in from the back with a couple of pocket screws to hold this in place. Now that I've got the top piece of the frame in place, I'll repeat that process with the piece of the frame that goes along the bottom. I'm not real worried about screwing these in with pocket screws from behind. You're not going to see them. And really, once I get this whole piece made with the plywood piece here and it's all screwed in together, help make sure it's nice and solid. I don't expect to have much issues with that. Next, I'm going to repeat the same process for the footboard as I did for the headboard. I am going to do one thing differently on the footboard than I did with the headboard. On the headboard, I notched out a little piece here to get around so that the groove in the back wouldn't show, but I realized since it's up against this post, the groove that I cut out to hold the plywood won't show anyway. So when I put this together for the footboard, instead of notching around the side post on the frame, I'm just going to let it hang over. This gap, you'll never see it because that's where the post of the footboard will go, and so it'll be hidden. I think it'll be a much cleaner look when it's all finished than it is trying to cut that out with the jigsaw. And here you can see how not cutting that lip out turned out to be a much better finish than the headboard where I did. Next, I'll cut some 3/4 inch plywood to fit inside of this groove on the back side of the frame. We'll attach the fake barnwood to that plywood, and then we'll attach that panel to the frame in the bed. Here you can see the back of the headboard. I left about 1/8 of an inch or so along the edge for expansion and contraction. The next thing that I'll do, I'm going to pull this plywood out, and this is what I'm going to use to attach the fake barnwood to. So we'll take another look at this fake barnwood that we'll use to make the headboard. I'm not sure what this is. I thought it was MDF at first, but I think it might actually be some sort of plastic material. It does have these pre-adhered strips here. I'm not sure how good these strips are going to adhere to the plywood, and I don't want to just rely on these 100%. So I am going to, as I lay this out, shoot it with some 18 gauge 3/4 inch brad nails just to make sure it stays securely in place. The next thing I'm going to do is snap a line 6 3/4 inch, the width of one board, from the bottom up. So I measured 6 3/4 up on that end, 6 3/4 inches up on this end. I'll snap my line, and that'll just make sure that I get my first row perfectly even with the bottom so that it doesn't get wonky and off track. Next, I'll take one of my faux pieces of barnwood, remove the adhesive piece on back, which seems pretty sticky, but I'm not wanting to just use just the adhesive to stick this on there. I'm going to line it up with my edge, press it in place. So I just tested the edge of this adhesive, and this stuff is on there really, really good. It's probably not going anywhere, but just to make sure that it never moves, I'm going to secure it in place with some 18 gauge 3/4 inch brad nails every 6 to 8 inches or so, just to tack it in place. I'll need to cut this next piece. Instead of measuring it, I'm just going to hold it up flush with the other piece, take a pencil, mark it on the back, take this over to my miter saw, finish cutting it up. Since I want this to be random, I'm not going to measure this next piece. I'm just going to simply take it over to my miter saw, pick a length that I think is going to look good, just going to cut it, and then I'll work my way back this way with the next piece. Going to line this up with the edge, press it in place, put a few nails in it, keep working my way back and forth until I get to the top. I need to trim this last piece flush with the plywood backer. I didn't adjust my table saw fence when I ripped this plywood backer down side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the original placement of that fence and then just run this through my table saw to take off this little piece that I don't need. Next, I'm going to take my panel and test fit it into the frame here for the headboard. When I do that, I'm going to put the cut end that I just cut off at the bottom so it's not as noticeable that it's a little bit thinner than the rest of the boards. Pretty good fit. Next, I'm just going to take some screws and fasten it to this frame that we made to hold it in place. And here's a sneak peek of what this is going to look like. I think it's turning out pretty good. Next, I'll use the same process and make an insert for the footboard. The next thing I'm going to do is mill down these 2x12s, which will become the side rails for the bed. For this, I'm just going to cut them to length. For my frame size, I need them to be 74 inches long. Then I'll run them through the table saw to get a couple of nice smooth edges on each side, and then run them through the planer to make sure they're nice and smooth. I gave these a final sanding down to 220. This is supposed to be a little bit more rustic looking piece. Next, we'll finish it with some Minwax wood stain, and then probably put a coat or two of poly over the top of it. Carrie got the first coat of finish on all the pieces, and it's looking really, really nice. Now that the bed is finished, the last thing I need to do is attach these brackets to the side rails and the headboard and footboard. And what this will allow me to do is actually make this bed so I can take it apart. So I'll put one of these brackets on the side rail, one of these on the headboard or footboard, and that way I don't have to have this bed all in one piece. I can take it apart and move it around as I need. Just makes it a little bit more manageable. I did get these on Amazon, however, it is a family-owned business. I'll leave a link down below, so if you want to get some for your own build, whether you're building a bed or something else that needs to come apart, these are super high quality, came with all the screws, really good instructions on how to put them together. So I'm going to go ahead and get these installed. To get these installed, I do want my bed to be 9 inches off of the ground, so I'm simply going to cut 2 blocks that are 9 inches tall, so I can rest the side rails on those while I line these brackets up and get them installed. So here you can start to see what it's going to look like. I'll have the headboard, the footboard, and these side rails going across each side. What I did is I took a block that's 9 inches tall and clamped it to each headboard and footboard post so that I know this board is perfectly level. That'll hold that in place while I get my removable bracket put in. Once I get that side done, I'll do this side. And the final thing to do is to put those inserts in the headboard and footboard. Here's a closer look at what I'm doing. I've got my 9-inch block here that supports my bracket and my sideboard so that I make sure that everything is nice and straight all the way across. Pre-drilling a couple holes and putting a couple of screws on each side to hold it for now. I'll come back and put 2 more screws in each side of these once I get everything square and lined up. And that is the finished look. And here's a preview of what it's going to look like when it's done. I'll attach those panels and the headboard and the footboard from behind with some screws. Then we'll put it in the room and see how it looks. And now that we have the bed set up, this is the final product.